Hey guys, Jake from 8020 Media here. Today we're going to be talking about performance upgrades and modifications for GM's 4.8 Vortec. The Vortec platform is notorious for being able to handle pretty significant amounts of additional power, and the 4.8 Vortec is essentially a de-stroked, smaller version of the 5.3 Vortec, which means that these engines have pretty good power potential and power limits. Now, it is a naturally aspirated engine, and so unlocking all of the power out of these engines isn't as simple as just dropping a basic tune and some bolt-on modifications on it. But with that being said, basic bolt-ons can still add about 50 to 60 horsepower, and then once we get into some more advanced bolt-on modifications like camshaft upgrades, then we talk about being able to add over 100 horsepower to these engines. In this video, we're going to focus mostly on these basic bolt-on modifications that you can do. I will touch on camshafts, forced induction, as well as nitrous, and some other small power adders for these engines. But once we start talking about adding serious horsepower, things start to get relatively expensive, as you'll need to start looking into internal upgrades. And so we're going to go ahead and mostly cover these basic bolt-on modifications that can get you up to about 100 horsepower on these engines. But first off, let's go ahead and just talk briefly about the power limits of the 4.8 Vortec. The 4.8 Vortec can handle about 500 horsepower before you need to start looking at internal upgrades, that being pistons, rods, head studs, and other internal components. The blocks on these engines can handle well over 1,000 horsepower, but you are going to run into the limitations from an internal standpoint as well as some fueling limitations. So because of that, that's what makes these engines very expensive once you start looking at breaking beyond the 500 horsepower level. But fortunately, to get to 500 horsepower, we're going to need forced induction, which takes us down a lot more expensive and a more advanced route. So let's go ahead and jump into the list of bolt-on modifications that we can use to get 100 horsepower on the 4.8 Vortec. First on our list is engine tuning. Engine tuning is going to be the baseline for all of the other modifications that you do to this engine. It's going to offer one of the best bang for the bucks from a power gain standpoint, but it's also really a building block that's going to help optimize the efficiency of your engine when combined with everything else that we talk about on this list. Overall, tuning can add about 15 to 30 horsepower and about 20 to 30 torque, depending on your list of modifications. Ultimately, flash tuning is a must-have and is one of the best modifications for both an efficiency and power standpoint. Behind tuning, your second best power gains are going to come from headers. There are a couple different routes that you can go here. The best route from a performance standpoint is going to be getting log tube headers. However, long tube headers do delete the catalytic converters, and so they are not emissions friendly. If you want an emissions friendly solution, you can go ahead and get short tube headers. They just offer a little bit less from a performance standpoint. Depending on which route you go, headers will add about 10 to 25 horsepower and are going to be the best exhaust modification that you can make. There is some benefit to upgrading the rest of the exhaust system. If you want to do a Catback system, you can probably see about 5 to 8 horsepower gains in addition to your headers, but headers are going to be where the big power gains are at. The Catback portion of the exhaust is more so whether or not you want your car to be louder or if you're really trying to squeeze every additional horsepower out of these engines that you can. After long tube headers, the next best upgrade is going to be a cold air intake. A cold air intake is probably going to add very minimal horsepower on a completely stock engine, but once we talk about tuning and freeing up the exhaust flow with headers and a Catback exhaust system, that's when we start to get some benefit from bringing more air into the engine. When tuned with exhaust upgrades, throwing an intake into the mix is good for about 5 to 10 horsepower. It's definitely a worthwhile mod. It's going to help improve airflow and really free up some of the restrictions within the factory air system. And then the last modification on this list is applicable to the L20 engines from 2010 to 2014, and that is E85 fueling. The L20 engines came with flex fuel capabilities, which means that you can run ethanol fueling. So just by filling up your gas tank with E85 or some type of ethanol blend, you can actually add about 10 to 15 horsepower just because ethanol burns at a way higher octane rating than your traditional premium or standard gasoline does. So that covers the basic bolt-ons that I'm going to talk about here. Just to recap it, there's tuning, headers, a Catback exhaust system, an intake, and then E85 fueling for the flex fuel capable vehicles. If you do all of these things to your 4.8 Vortec, you're probably going to be looking somewhere around $2,000 depending on the route you go, and you should be able to add a good 50 to 60 horsepower to these engines. Now, if we want to take things beyond those power gains and get to the 100 horsepower that I was talking about, then that's when we're going to want to start looking into camshafts. Camshafts are going to be good for about 20 to 40 horsepower on these engines, while still being able to keep it in a daily driver or street friendly mode. You can get a lot more aggressive on your camshafts and add a lot more power than that, but you're going to sacrifice a lot of drivability, and it's not going to make it very friendly or fun from a daily driving standpoint. Camshafts are definitely something that's good to look into, just a little bit more advanced because they're harder to install and to access in the engine, but it is a great modification if you have the budget for it and you're really looking to push things just to another level. After camshaft upgrades, that's when we start talking about forced induction. These Vortec engines respond to boost extremely well. You've got good options for both turbocharging or supercharging these engines, but as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, that's when these setups get a lot more complex. You're going to need to start looking at some internal upgrades. You're going to need to look at head studs and other things to help support the additional power that this is going to produce. With forced induction, the sky's really the limit here. You can get forced induction setups that can put you at a safe 450 horsepower to where you don't need to start looking into some of these more advanced internal modifications, or you can look at turbocharger and supercharger setups that can take you to that 1000 horsepower level. For that reason, this topic gets a lot more advanced, and so we'll save that for a future video. But just know that if you want to add anywhere from 100 plus horsepower on these engines, you're going to need to start looking at forced induction. That's where your big power gains are going to come from, and you're not going to be able to squeeze too much more than 100 or maybe 125 horsepower out of these engines without adding some type of forced induction, or adding next on my list, which is nitrous. Nitrous is an easy and cheap way to get short bursts of power. You can add 150 or 200 horsepower with some shots of nitrous in your car. Now, that's not consistent power, so I don't really love putting it on a list of modifications and upgrades, but nitrous is an option. These engines respond well to it. They can handle the additional power from it. And so if you're looking for some quick power bursts, nitrous is an option as well. And outside of that, there are a few other things that probably fall within the bolt-on category that are worthwhile talking about as well. High flow injectors, if you upgrade your injectors, you can get about 5 to 15 extra horsepower out of these depending on the tuning and the fueling that you're running. Also, upgrading the spark plugs and ignition coils can help add about 5 horsepower as well. An upgraded intake manifold can add about 10 to 20 horsepower. And so those three things are something to look into if you really want to, in bolt-on form, maximize the performance and power of the 4.8 Vortec. Ultimately, guys, about $2,000 and you can add 50 to 60 horsepower. Throw a camshaft on top of that, you can get to 100 horsepower, and anything after that's when you'll want to start looking at more advanced setups with forced induction, which is when these engines start to get a bit more expensive. Anyways, I hope this video was helpful. If you guys appreciate this content, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for our future Vortec content.